Welcome to the Charity Changemakers podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and action for the changemakers of the world. Each week, we dive deep into the world of impactful charities. We connect you with the passionate leaders, the innovative ideas, and the real-world stories that are making a difference. Whether you're a seasoned non-profit professional or just starting out, this podcast is your chance to learn from the best and get fired up to make a positive change. We'll explore the challenges and triumphs of running a successful charity. We'll hear about the fundraising strategies, impactful programs, and the stories of the people whose lives are being transformed. But most importantly, we'll leave you feeling empowered and equipped to take action in your community and the organisations in which you work. So, buckle up, Changemakers, because we're about to embark on a journey of inspiration and impact.
Today I'm joined by Paul Winspear, who's the Chief Executive of Weston Hospicecare. Now, Paul, we invited onto the show because he's got an absolutely incredible career journey from having worked in the oil and gas industry for 25 years, managing some large global companies. He then made that transition into being the Chief Executive of Weston Hospicecare 7.5 years ago. We share in some really fascinating points across the conversation, some really interesting insights about some of the leadership styles and qualities and personal traits that are really important to making that transition well as a good conversation around transferable skills. I hope for those of you that are considering maybe a move from outside of the charity sector to within the charity sector, that this will be a really inspiring conversation. So no more from me. Let's get on and meet our changemaker. Paul, it's great to have you here today on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, that's great. And as we do with all of these podcasts, we like to start off with some quickfire questions, a bit of an opportunity for those that are listening and the audience to get to know you a little bit better and find out more about you as an individual. So I'm going to kick off with our first quickfire question and ask you where the most interesting place you've ever visited is.
I would have to go with a small island in the Indonesian archipelago of islands, which is quite a long way east of Bali and north of Bali. It's a group of islands called Kangean Islands, and there's a small island there called Pagarugan Besar, which is only about 7 kilometres long and 1 kilometre wide. And I was based there for about 6 months in 1993. Okay. And I was on a field crew for a geophysical survey, and it was an absolutely fascinating place to be. So, yeah, I will choose that as my most interesting place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it might not be a surprise, but nobody's picked that one yet. So that's so that's good. And
there is also a Pagarugan Kecil. So even though the island was only 7 kilometres long, Pagarugan Besar means large. So there was also a Pagarugan Kecil.
Yes, right, okay. It's one of those, I'm going to have to go and look at an atlas after our conversation to work out exactly where it is, but that's brilliant. So second quickfire question for you. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm currently reading a book called Winter Swimming, which is translated from the Danish. It's written by a Danish author, and it's all about the whole practice of winter swimming, even in very cold climates, like we have to break the ice. I haven't done that, I hasten to add, as yet. But it's all about the benefits, both physiological and mental, of winter swimming. And it's something I'm quite interested in, and I'm doing more and more wild swimming down here in the Somerset and Devon area.
Yes, right, okay. So is that going to be the next challenge? Is it some winter wild swimming?
Yeah, well, the idea is you start in the summer and then you just keep going, you see.
That's right, okay. Well, a lot of respect, yes, yeah, for you for that. So no, that's great. And a final quickfire question then for you, Paul, outside, and maybe we know the answer to this already, but outside of work, what do you like to do to relax?
I think the way I tend to unwind is through exercise mostly. So I tend to get up quite early. I normally wake up at about 5, and usually from 6 till 7, I either go swimming or cycling or gym, just to start the day off on a good note. I do find throughout my working career, I've loved what I do. I love my work. I don't like desk time. So sitting at a desk and being tied to a screen, nothing against the current process, by the way, but just being tied to a desk all the time and the screen gets pretty tiresome. So anything I can do that gets me up and moving and away from the screen. So whether that's exercise or a bit of hiking or just generally being in the outdoors, that's what I enjoy.
I think in those moments, that's real time and space and reflection, isn't it? To like you say, give you that bigger picture view of, because of course your brain's still thinking about those things that are happening at work or the bigger picture and the stuff that's going through. So it's really important to create that space.
I've solved quite a few work problems while watching the bottom of a swimming pool go backwards and forwards 100 times.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. One of the things I used to, with my last role, I used to have sort of an hour and 15-minute commute. And whilst I would have much preferred to be on my bike or in the gym or doing something like that, I think some of the best decisions I ever made when I was a fundraising director was actually on the M3, going up and down, driving up and down Hampshire, backwards and forwards, and that sort of decompression time, I think, between
Absolutely. A little bit of a commute can be a very good thing just to transition from home to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul, look, really pleased that you're able to join us on the podcast today. A lot of this podcast is about exploring people's journey into the charity sector and how they've found themselves working in the sector. And when we sat down and thought about people that we wanted to invite onto the show, your name was very much up the top of the list for us, because we recognised there was that journey around coming from a very commercial background into the charity sector and that transition. And, we're always talking to people that are thinking about that transition. So we just thought it'd be really fascinating to spend some time hearing about that journey. Do you want to give us a little bit of a bit of a career oversight and how that transition to the sector came about?
Okay, well, my first career was in oil and gas exploration, marine geophysical surveying, seismic surveys. I started in that industry in 1990 and did 25 years consistently. Most of that was overseas. I started off working in the Far East. My very first, the first place I signed on to the company was in Singapore. Ended up working offshore for about 2 years on seismic vessels, then came ashore and started going through various levels of operational management, went through some sales and marketing, into sort of P&L responsible positions, area manager positions, sort of cut a long story short and fast forward. I did 12 years in the Far East and Australia. I did 4 years in Norway, just under a year in France, and served as managing director of a global exploration firm headquartered in Oslo, and then did a stint as a chief operating officer for a firm based in the UK. So just gradually sort of worked my way up. I guess I never had any particular management or leadership ambitions. Just followed my nose through those companies. And I had no plan and no particular ambition to move into the not-for-profit sector either. Right. Sorry if it's not very sort of predetermined in terms of my career. But no, I guess what happened was after 25 years, the oil and gas industry was going through a fairly difficult time anyway. I'd left my role I was in Paris at the time. I'd come back to the UK. I was doing some consulting work. I just felt a little bit jaded with the industry, and also I was increasingly aware of the environmental impact of the sector, and I started to feel a little bit more uncomfortable with that. So I just decided to look around, and I decided to keep a really open mind. I convinced myself that I had leadership credentials. I felt like I'd done a really good job of leading teams and eventually leading a company in the oil and gas sector. So I started looking around. I looked at all kinds of different opportunities, and some mostly in the commercial sector, the corporate sector. And then I stumbled upon an advert for the chief executive of Hospice, providing end-of-life care. And when I saw it, I glossed over it because I think my first thought was, well, that's just too left field. That's way out there. But then a couple of days later, I saw the advert again. I think I saw it through a slightly different route. And I don't know what it was, Adam. I think something I just piqued my curiosity. So I started to read through the advertisement for the role. And the hospice has done a really good job of crafting the candidate pack, and they put in a very detailed person specification. And as I read through, I said, well, hang on a minute, that's me that they're describing. Well, how is that possible? I don't really understand that, because this is a hospice and I'm from oil and gas. So then that really got me interested. Then I read more, and all of a sudden I was hooked. And I just thought this would be fantastic. This would be a real change. What a difference this would be. I'd be able to work altruistically. I'd be able to give something back. I'd be able to feel connected to local community, having been flying all around the world for 20 years. And so I researched the heck out of it, went for interview, somehow managed to convince the interview panel and the trustees that I was the right candidate, and they offered me the position, and that was 7.5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite a transition, I think, because you think about the places that you were working beforehand. I mean, and you say, managing the company. I mean, they weren't small small companies, were they?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the firm that I was managing out of Oslo had an annual P&L of about 470 million euros. So it was a big company. I mean, a FTSE 250 size company at the time. It was a lot of money. Yeah. But I think that's been a real eye-opener for me. I mean, the P&L I manage now, factoring in inflation, is almost exactly 100 times smaller than that. Yeah. And yet it's just as important. Every pound counts. So the pounds replace the thousands of pounds. Yeah. It just doesn't matter. It's just as important. And and a lot of the same principles apply. So it's been a really interesting change.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wonder through that. I mean, clearly the board were very, I guess, open to your application and to going on that exploration, and clearly they appointed you. But and you haven't got that experience, I guess, of going through other processes. But did you feel like you were really fighting your corner as you were kind of in that interview process, and that about trying to say, well, look, I've done this, and this is how it transfers, or was it quite quite an engaging, open process?
Not really, to be honest, because I wasn't really sure what to expect. I mean, I did a lot of research, but it's never the same as walking through the door. I've never been in a hospice before. Yeah. Which shows I probably led quite a lucky life in terms of not having lost any family or friends where they needed to spend time in hospice. I didn't know what to expect when I walked through the door of the hospice. I didn't really know exactly what they'd be looking for. To their credit, I think the trustees were looking for someone with business acumen, someone with leadership skills. At the end of the day, and I'm sure this is the case for a lot of charities in the not-for-profit sector, it's a business. We have to run it as a business. I mean, our raison d'etre to provide best quality palliative and end-of-life care to everyone who needs it in our area. We can only do that. The doctors and nurses can only do that and deliver great care if we run this charity as a business and super efficiently, protecting every pound that comes in, doing everything right, ticking all the compliance boxes so that they can then get on with what they do best. So I think the trustees were able to, the charity had been through a really tough time and was in quite a difficult place financially. So they were looking for someone with commercial experience who could come in and apply a lot of that business acumen and that fiscal understanding to really be on top of the numbers and to guide the charity forwards on a strategic path that was going to be sustainable. Because that's the key. And funnily enough, after 7 years, we're back in that cycle again now. Because we've had 7 really good years, and now it's super tough again.
Yeah. So I'm interested in that transition then from clearly from that very commercial background to landing the job as chief executive of the hospice, and then walking in on day one, and I guess the reception to someone like yourself walking into an organisation like the hospice, but then about how that journey began and what that was like in those first few days, weeks, months.
Well, I certainly was never made to feel like an imposter or an outsider. I mean, the welcome was fantastic. I think, in the sector I was in previously, we were operating super expensive assets. I mean, these vessels that were owned, each vessel was worth $200 million. It was super heavy machinery, heavy assets, very asset heavy business. I mean, what a contrast with the hospice. 70% of our total operating costs here are payroll and staff-related costs.
Yeah.
But both organisations, all the organisations I work for, it's all about people. And so, coming in was just about meeting people, making connections, listening properly, being humble, learning, walking around, finding out what makes the place tick, learning the culture, because there is an interesting cultural difference, and just really understanding the journey that the hospice had been on, what the current challenges were, and then by talking to everyone and understanding and working with different departments and managers, then building a strategy for the future. So yes, there was a steep learning curve for 3 to 6 months. Well, no, actually probably longer than that, probably more like 12 months. But that's not to say that was all I was doing in the first 12 months. I mean, there were some areas where I was immediately able to bring, to contribute and to help stabilise and to chart a direction. But over 12 months, I was able to learn enough about the sector and to understand sufficiently that I could then work with everybody internally and also externally to build a 5-year strategy, which is what we did.
Yeah. And I think it's really important when you talk about that relationship and that people management, the stakeholder engagement, because I always think with a hospice, such a range of staff as well across the organisation, from clearly clinicians to your fundraising, your marketing, your retail staff, to your HR, right through to then dealing with external stakeholders as well, and everyone that local community that you're managing, as well as funders and everything else that's going on. So that I guess that stakeholder management is that's the incredibly transferable skill, and what you clearly were doing for 25 years in oil and gas.
Absolutely, and that's both internally and externally. So I mean, internally, everyone comes to work wanting to do a good job. No one comes to work, to deliberately make a mistake or have a bad day. So really understanding what motivates people. I mean, people need to know what's expected of them, what their role is, how that fits into the wider organisation. People need to have a shared sense of purpose, a shared vision, and whether that vision is to operate safely and make a profit, or whether that vision is to provide the best possible end-of-life experience for someone who is in a really bad way. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a shared vision. Everyone's on the same team. It's team before self and before ego, and motivating people, bring them together, and giving them that sense of connectedness. And that's actually particularly challenging in hospice, and I'm guessing in quite a few other charities, is that there's a lot of different moving parts. And whereas the moving parts in the oil industry tend to be very large machinery, the moving parts here are very different disciplines. So, I mean, we have a chain of 16 retail stores. Now, the way in which you operate a charity retail store efficiently and providing good customer service in a charity store, that's quite different from administering a pain-relieving drug at end of life. I mean, they're quite different disciplines. Or indeed, operating a fundraising event, that's quite different again. And I love that. I love the different moving parts of the hospice, and having to be agile enough mentally and sometimes actually physically to jump from one discipline to another, and of course as a CEO you do that several times in one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, as you reflect, because I mean, clearly, it's you've been there 7.5 years. It's obviously it's been, like you say, it's been seven good years. There's been I'm sure challenges and opportunities along the way that I'm sure we'll touch upon. But that transition from commercial world, you indulge me in some stereotypes. You quite often think of commercial world as a bit more cutthroat and a bit very P&L driven, and about about that profit and people working towards that, and working long hours, all of that stuff that I think people think about the commercial sector. How is that experience within that sector, or what are the differences that you then found in that transition to the charity sector? What is it that you think within your leadership qualities or personality that's helped you to thrive in the environment of the charity sector, and how different does it actually look in reality?
Well, in their own, it's a really good question. I mean, in their own way, I would say they're both quite brutal environments, because in the corporate sector that I was in, working for publicly listed American and Dutch companies, it was that constant drive for profits. Take no prisoners. You perform or you're out. Certainly in the early part of my career, before things start, a little bit more employment legislation started to come in, but that was very much the messaging in those early days. And it was quite a brutal environment, and as a result, quite a high pressured environment. You basically sank or you swam, but in a different way. The hospice is also a very challenging environment, because here what we do is emotionally supercharged, because I only need to look out the window of my office and in the car park, and I can see family members of people who are at the end of their life, and you see what it means to people, and it brings it home to you just how important the service is. It's such a personal thing. Saying goodbye to someone at the end of their life is a very, very personal thing, and quite often, we have family members who come in with their loved one, and they've been shouldering a huge amount of burden in terms of the care of their loved one, which of course they've done willingly, but they're exhausted. When they come into the hospice, they can just put down that burden, hand their loved one over to us, which is it takes my breath away in terms of the trust that they place in us to look after their loved one. It's a real privilege, real responsibility. And then they could go back to being a son or a daughter again, or a brother or a sister, or sometimes a parent, and as opposed to a carer. So that's a heck of a responsibility, and also the love of the local community for the hospice is such that in the oil industry, yes, it was cutthroat. Yes, it was a drive for profits. Yes, it was you would perform or out, but there was a hierarchy. And if you were in a certain position, you provided the instructions. Yeah, of course you listened to feedback, but there was definitely a hierarchy here. There's a hierarchy, but I can tell you that every single member of the community feels they know how to run hospice. Yeah, and every volunteer has a vested interest, and everyone is a stakeholder, a real stakeholder in the hospice. And the hospice is owned by the community. Only 20% of our income is statutory income from the government. So 80% comes from all of our fundraising activities and our retail stores. So as long as we rely on the community for 80% of our income, and as long as all of our army of volunteers come from the community, and as long as all our services are provided to the community, this hospice belongs to the community. So really, they are just allowing me to spend some time here as CEO. And that's a real privilege and a real responsibility. So in different ways, I see the pressured environment of corporate and oil and gas. Yes, that did come across, and that did bear down in a certain way. But to be honest, the stakes are just as high here in a different way. The numbers are smaller, but the responsibility and I would say actually I feel a greater personal responsibility in my role now than I did in 25 years in oil and gas.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure. And like you say, I mean, in comparison to a bunch of shareholders, when you've got the community that you're essentially reporting to and working for, then yeah, I can absolutely imagine that. Yeah, that sense of responsibility and because of who you are and what you do as an organisation, being there in people's time of need is so critical. And as you reflect, then I guess on that transition, because I guess we as a recruiter, we have conversations with people that that will pick up the phone and say, I'm looking for something in the sector because I've done my time in the commercial. I'm looking for something a bit easier. And that always sort of disheartens us a little bit, because it just isn't like that. Okay, are we going some way to debunking that myth in the conversation that we're having?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say to anyone who is thinking about it is, do not, and I say this to anybody, and in fact, I have ex-colleagues from oil and gas contact me and say, well, tell me about, what you did and how you found it. And do not underestimate how transferable your skills are. The skills that you build up in the corporate sector are absolutely transferable to the not-for-profit sector. So absolutely consider it a good, option, and I would recommend it to anyone. On the other hand, don't do it because you think it'll be easy.
Yeah,
it's not easy. It's not easy at all. The reasons why is different might the reasons why it's difficult might be different from the corporate sector, but they're no less real. So yeah, it's and you're right, Adam. We see it all the time. We interview people for roles, and you can tell sometimes people think that they'll come in and it'll be a slightly easier ride, and there's definitely that perception which kind of niggles me a little bit, that it's a soft ride working for a charity, but it's not. It's quite brutal. It's quite tough. There's the hospice has been around now for 35 years. We need to make sure it keeps going for another 35 years and longer. So keeping it going, making it sustainable, and at the same time continually improving it, it's a big responsibility. And one of the things I love most about there's lots of things I miss about the corporate sector. There is a side to international travel and business class and staying in nice hotels and all the rest of it. There is a side to that if I'm being really honest, I do miss some of that. Yeah. But there's things about this sector in terms of what it means to people, and the feeling that I can make a direct connection every single day between the work I'm doing and helping people. I can make that connection, and that's really fulfilling. The other thing I love about it is there is definitely a tension or an apparent contradiction at the hospice, and I'm sure in many other charities, between the really soft side of the way in which we deliver care, the way in which we speak to relatives, at point, the soft side at point of delivery of care, in stark contrast to the brutal reality of the numbers, and being quite hard-nosed with regard to certain decisions with suppliers, pushing back, looking at supply chain, looking at contracts that are problematic, and being quite, holding a pretty hard line on some of that stuff. So that apparent contradiction, I really enjoy that. I really like that. Having to be agile enough to move between those states is something I think is really enjoyable. So yeah. It's hard for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suspect your experience of being in the commercial sector, when it comes to, like you say, that contract, that supply, think about supply chains and think about that work, brings that, as you said at the very start of the conversation, that business acumen to the decisions and the running and the life of the hospice that's so incredibly important for you. So, like you say, for its future sustainability and ensuring that continued high level delivery of service now and into the future.
Absolutely, and there is a direct translation. The technical details may differ, whether it's geophysical technical expertise versus the expertise of end-of-life care. But in terms of the fiscal life cycle of budgeting, monitoring actuals versus budget, forecasting, monitoring cash, looking at balance sheet, it's very, very similar. in terms of the whole procurement supply chain cycle, the contracting cycle. We depend on suppliers in the same way as you do in a commercial sector. The health and safety side of what we do, obviously the stakes in terms of health and safety were higher when I was in the oil industry, and that was a really good training ground for learning about health and safety. The whole marketing piece, business to business marketing, business to customer marketing. I mean, that's absolutely what we do here in terms of reaching out to stakeholders, reaching out to members of the public, reaching out to corporates to give us support, quality assurance, all the compliance aspects, with not just health and safety, but in terms of CQC regulation. There are so many similarities in terms of all the different hoops you have to jump through and the things to cover. So yeah, definitely.
And so many, as you mentioned all of that, I mean, so many moving parts as well, and things that you're managing. As you reflect on the last sort of 7.5 years, and you talked about 5 years, having to put a 5-year strategy in place and the work that took place there. As you reflect on the last 7 years, 7 and a bit, what have been the successes? What I guess been the opportunities that have come along through the years?
Yeah, I think I've been very, very fortunate. I've had a fantastic team working with me at the hospice, and in fact, the senior leadership team today is the strongest it's been since I joined. That team has made a real difference. So, we've had seven good years. I mentioned we've got a few headwinds at the moment because of the cost of living crisis and the continual pressure to make ends meet in an inflationary environment where costs have spiraled up so much is really, really tough. But no, we've managed to grow our services. We've managed to bring in different aspects to our care, expand our day services offering to patients. We've managed to. Generally speaking, it's about looking very much at patient need, unmet need, and asking ourselves, okay, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we get the biggest bang for our buck? If we spend a little bit of money there, what would be the outcomes? What would be the deliverables versus doing it there? And it's about really prioritizing. And we've had quite a few successes in the last 7 years. So a couple of other things we've done. We did a £500,000 transformation of our day services for outpatients, that whole environment. We managed to get about 2/3 of that funded, so we used some excess reserves to fund the remainder. We have absolutely transformed our retail business by moving what we used to call our hub, which is essentially a warehouse operation, to a completely different site and attach it to the back of a superstore. And the superstore is actually a former car showroom. So it used to be the Hyundai showroom for Weston Supermare, and where the cars used to be parked is now all of our furniture and other merchandise. And we've opened a drive-through donation centre on the same site. Right. And it's just perfectly placed in terms of what we call footfall, which in this case is traffic throughput, which moves slowly past the road on the way to Waitrose and Asda. So we get excellent footfall, fantastic donation levels, really good sales that have exceeded all our projections in that superstore. Yeah. And as a result of that, our retail business is absolutely flying. So I think we've had some real successes, and it's been a really good few years. But as I say, tougher times right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really interested in that retail environment as well, because that's you've 16 stores in total. I love the idea of a drive-through donations, which is, and clearly if they're close to the supermarkets as well, people, very deliberately getting in the car and going somewhere. I guess it just makes that whole giving of donations just so much easier than having to find somewhere on the high street or in that process. So presumably you've seen an increase in donation levels coming through the door to then distribute across the store network.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, some stores, depending where they're located and whether they've got parking space outside, some stores are self-sufficient for donations. Some are net contributors to donations, and some rely on being supplied with donations. But yeah, the donation centre has really increased our level of donations. And one of the things I learned quite quickly when in charity retail is a shop or a store, as I'm always reminded to call them. You can move it 100 metres down the road next to a bus stop or next to a Tesco Express, or you can move it across to the other side of a road, and the footfall is completely different. So, the old adage, location, it's never more true than in the case of charity retail. You've got to be in the right place.
Yes.
And then as long as you do a decent job of stocking and arranging and presenting your store, then you'll be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading a piece of research. I think it was the British Heart Foundation, and it was probably going back best part of a decade. But they had done some work about the best place to have your charity shop. And at the time, I was working for a charity, and we were opening new stores and thinking about that location. And ultimately, what it came down to was exactly that, nearest to the car park. Because if people are coming with donations, then actually they want convenience over having to walk past 2 or 3 shops. They weren't necessarily brand loyal. Although I think you see a little bit of difference when it comes to the hospice sector as well, because of just how intrinsically engaged they are in the local community. It's a little bit like air ambulances as well.
Yeah, I mean, every complaint that we ever receive comes across my desk, and I would say half of the complaints that I see are from customers who donated to us for years and wanted to donate and weren't able to because we were just absolutely rammed with donations and we just physically couldn't take the stock, and we had to regretfully turn them away. And people were quite upset about that. I've supported the hospice for the last 20 years, and you couldn't take my donation. So it's that loyalty to the hospice amongst the local community, and actually we all charity retail provides a very valuable recycling and upcycling service in terms of used goods and donations. And amongst the younger demographic, that's quite trendy now, to shop in a charity store, and there's always a few bargains to be had. So anyone wants to pop down to Weston Supermare or Somerset and check out some of our shops, come and have a look.
Yeah. Although there's an online offering as well, is there not? Or have I got that wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. There is. Yeah. So we online store, and we use Vinted, and we use eBay. Yep. And a couple of other specific platforms for vinyl records, for books, etc. What we're always trying to do is maximise, obviously, the value that we can of donations, and to protect the gift aid sort of heritage of stock, and maximise the income.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I don't know how far or whether this is the journey that you're on, but about how. Yeah, we were always about, well, how do you turn a customer into a donor and then potentially donors into customers in that time? But that more joined up thinking across those teams as well, between fundraising and retail, because like you say, you don't necessarily want people going off in lots of different silos, but that sense of working together. And I don't know how difficult that is in any environment, but particularly I guess within your environment, again, when I just think about all of these different moving parts that you've got across your delivery of service right through to funding it.
No, you're spot on. It's a real challenge. There is a tendency, and I know this from the other Southwest hospices CEOs. I'm part of that network, and I know from talking to them that it's a constant battle to make sure that hospices don't become siloed, and that the different departments talk to each other and understand what their role is as part of the whole, but also have a good understanding of what each other does. So it's a constant challenge with internal comms to make sure that everyone feels interconnected and knows what they're doing. And that donor journey, whether it starts in a shop or whether it starts by doing an event, and the brand loyalty and gradually building that through the experience. And I'm lucky. I've got a fantastic director of retail, really fantastic director of fundraising, and they communicate well together and are always looking for crossover. And the shops, of course, we serve quite a wide area of North Somerset and Summer Somerset, and we're called Weston Hospicecare, but we don't just serve Weston Supermare. We serve quite a wide area, and our shops are dotted around. So anywhere that we have patients, we can put a store. That's generally speaking is the gentleman's agreement between hospices and I guess between charities in general. Yeah. So we wouldn't, for example, put a store in central Bristol because we don't have patients in central Bristol.
Yes.
But those stores where they're dotted around our area, the area we serve, those are real portals onto the community, and those are touch points for the local community with the hospice. So how we present ourselves and how we run those stores is incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions that I ask people that come on the show is if you were to go back and to talk to yourself at the very start of your career, what piece of advice would you give yourself, or what nugget have you taken away? I guess I kind of slightly want to reframe that question for you, Paul, just to put you even extra on the on the spot, in that sense of what do you think? I guess, and it might be some of those softer skills or that characteristics. What do you think has really helped in that transition for you from a commercial sector into charity sector to make that transition? And where have you found the learnings and the support in a completely different sector over the last 7.5 years to clearly be thriving and helping the hospice to grow and go from strength to strength in a whole range of different ways? Yeah,
it's a really good question. I mean, I think. I guess like a lot of us, I look back at my early career and I think to myself, gosh, if only I'd known then what I know now.
Sure.
And all the different situations that one finds oneself in. And, back in the early 90s, especially, the first 8 years of my career were in the Far East. And I always say it was like the Wild West in the Far East. I mean, it was really quite an extreme environment to find myself in. And there was no copybook for that. You learned on the job. Yes, there was training along the way, but generally speaking, the training would come after you'd been exposed to situations where you had to adapt and learn. And actually, looking back, I wouldn't change that. I think for personal character development, it was fantastic. Maybe not the ideal way to do things, certainly not in this day and age, but I consider myself lucky that I had those experiences and I was thrust into that environment and I was trusted. Yeah. So I think two things I would say, and the advice I would give to anyone at the start of their career. Generally speaking, my experience is most people, if you trust your intuition, if you've got a feeling about someone that they'll do well, give them a go. Generally speaking, most people, with a little bit of support and a little bit of backing, will succeed. You just have to see something in them, see the right basic raw materials, give them a go, and they will succeed. And then I guess the sort of the related side to that to anyone is, I think when you're young in your career, you don't have the experience, you don't have the real confidence that you build later in your career. And sometimes that lack of confidence will come across in the wrong way. Sometimes it will come across as insecurity, or come across as arrogance. It will come across as being, a little bit bullish. And you don't need to be like that. I mean, you just back yourself, be quietly confident. It doesn't matter what your age is. If you've got what it takes, you've got what it takes. So back yourself, back other people. Generally speaking, as I say, everyone wants to go to work and do a good job.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was the first part of the question. I forgot what the second part.
There was a few questions in one, just to confuse you, Paul. Really, yeah. But I think you're right. The evidence is in the delivery, isn't it, and the impact that your work has. I guess the other thing that I was interested in is about where you've got support as being a chief executive in the hospice and making that transition. I mean, you talked about clearly a very engaged and supportive board, as well as a team that we're really welcoming, and a team that you've been able to grow and strengthen. But you also mentioned about other chief executives within the local area as well. I just wonder if sometimes we're having those types of sounding boards, whether that's been something that's been useful, been helpful for you over the last few years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I really, funnily enough, I'm going to a meeting of the Southwest CEOs Network tomorrow. That's the Southwest Hospice CEOs. But I'm also a member of the Vistage CEO network, and I find that extremely valuable, that peer support, and also it's a touch point with the corporate world as well. I think those kinds of organisations. I mean, another one that I haven't directly experienced, but the Academy of Chief Executives, I think, and Akivo, I think are really, really useful. So I would definitely recommend that. I mean, I think in terms of development, personal development and how you change, I think it's a curious thing because, and I hope this sort of doesn't come across as being sort of self-indulgent in any way. But I think what tends to happen is as you go through your career and as you sort of spend more and more time leading organisations, you develop a lot more self-confidence, but you also feel a lot more humble because you become more aware of all the people around you that really are the reasons for your so-called success. I mean, I'd like to think that my 7 years at this hospice has been a real success, but it's not down to me per se. It's down to the team and how hard everyone works and the way everyone pulls together. So I think as you go through your career, I think you build that confidence, and whether the transition from the corporate sector to the not-for-profit sector has accelerated that process for me, and that feeling, I guess, of humility that I'm just carrying the baton for a short time and then I'm passing it on to the next person, and it's the institution that is the truly impressive thing. Maybe that would have been the same if I stayed in the corporate sector, but I just feel very lucky to have had a great career in oil and gas, and now a very rewarding career in not-for-profit. And I would say, I can honestly say that leading the hospice has been the biggest privilege of my professional life. It's such an honour, it's such a privilege to be able to say that you're chief executive of an organisation like this. It's really great.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, and Paul, so incredibly grateful for you coming on and sharing a little bit of your story and your journey with us today. And I think, can only back up those words. And I think the people that we see that thrive when they make that transition is there's a humble nature, there's an empathy, there's a motivation for the cause that comes through, and that very people-centered approach to the ways in which they work and engage people that have allow people to thrive in that switch in sectors, and something that I'm sure this will be a really inspiring story to others to hear and to learn from. So thank you, thank you for coming on. Are you happy that when we put this stuff out, Paul, that we sort of tag you on LinkedIn if anybody had any questions or anything that sort of sprung to mind or something they wanted to bounce off you, if you were happy for them to drop you a message that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this is helpful to people, I mean, hopefully it will encourage some people to maybe to be interested in not-for-profit, where perhaps they weren't before, to give them confidence that they could make that transition and that their skills are relevant. So I really hope so, yes. And if anyone would like to reach out or have a chat or connect on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy to do that. So it'd be an absolute pleasure. And thank you to Charisma and to you, Adam, for giving me the opportunity as well. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, well, you're very welcome. Really pleased that you were able to come on, and thanks for your time. Look, it's one of these things that maybe we'll have to do this again in 18 months, 2 years time, and see how things have progressed and going on. But once again, Paul, really pleased that you were able to come on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Bye.
And that's a wrap for this week on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Remember, you can be the change you want to see in the world. We hope that this episode has inspired you to get out there and make a difference. This podcast was brought to you by Charisma Charity Recruitment, one of the UK's leading recruitment consultancies for the charity sector. Whether you're a passionate professional seeking your next challenge or a charity searching for a top-tier talent, Charisma Charity Recruitment can help. Visit their website at charismarecruitment.co.uk to explore their latest positions and to connect your organisation with the change makers shaping the future of the non-profit world. Thanks for joining us.